The advertisement had been simple enough. 2 lines in a regional newspaper, the ink slightly uneven where the press had run low. Help wanted. Dry Creek Mercantile. Ask for R. Calloway. Clara Voss had read those 2 lines standing in the cold doorway of a post office in Harlan, Montana, with 43 cents in her coat pocket and no particular reason to stay where she was. She had been traveling for 11 days by the time the stage dropped her in Dry Creek, not running from anything specific. That was what she told herself. More accurately, she was moving away from a version of her life that had quietly collapsed around her, a broken engagement to a man whose family had decided, after 2 years of careful courtship, that Clara's circumstances were no longer sufficient. They had been polite about it. That had somehow made it worse. Dry Creek was smaller than she had imagined from the advertisement. Most frontier towns were. A single main street with buildings that leaned slightly into the wind, as though they had been arguing with it for years and had reached a tired compromise. A livery, a church whose white paint had gone the color of old bone. A general store at the far end with a hand-lettered sign above the door that read Calloway Mercantile, Est, 1871. She pushed through the door on a Wednesday morning in early September, her traveling bag in one hand and her composure arranged carefully on her face, the way you arrange furniture in a room you are not yet sure you will stay in. The store was dim and smelled of dry goods and sawdust and something metallic she couldn't name. Shelves ran floor to ceiling on 3 walls, packed with the particular organized disorder of a business that moved a great deal of inventory without much help. Behind the long wooden counter at the back, a man was writing in a ledger. He did not look up immediately. When he did, Clara understood 2 things at once. The first was that R. Calloway was younger than she had expected from an advertisement that felt like it had been written by someone much older. He was perhaps 32, with dark eyes that moved over her face with the quick assessing quality of a man accustomed to taking stock of things. The second was that something in his expression just for a moment shifted, not rudely, not obviously, but in the way a person's face shifts when they are presented with a situation they had not fully prepared for. "You're here about the position," he said. It was not quite a question. "I am," Clara said. "Clara Voss. I have references if you need them." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for the purposes of a business conversation. Then he closed the ledger. "Reuben Calloway," he said. "The position is 6 days a week. Inventory, accounts, customer service. The hours are long and the pay is modest." "I understand long hours," Clara said. Something moved briefly across his face. "I expect you do," he said, and she could not tell if it was a compliment or simply an observation. He hired her on the spot. She would think about that later, about how quickly he had decided, and whether that quickness had been practical, necessity, or something else entirely. The work suited her. That was the first thing she discovered about Dry Creek. The second was that Reuben Calloway was a man of significant contradictions. He was methodical to the point of precision. Every account balanced to the cent, every order recorded in a hand so careful it might have belonged to a man twice his age. He was unfailingly courteous to customers, patient with the elderly widow, Mrs. Fenn, who came in every Thursday and required 20 minutes to make a decision about thread. He was generous in the small ways that people rarely noticed, adding a tin of coffee to old Hargrove's order without adjusting the bill, never once drawing attention to the fact. But there were things he did not speak of. Clara noticed this the way she noticed most things, quietly, over time, without making it obvious that she was noticing at all. He never spoke of family. He received no letters, or if he did, they did not arrive at the store. Twice in the first 2 weeks, men came through Dry Creek on horseback and stopped to speak with him on the front steps of the Mercantile, and both times he stepped outside to meet them, rather than inviting them in. And both times the conversation was brief and low and left him quieter than usual for the remainder of the afternoon. She did not ask. It was not her place. And beyond that, she understood the particular privacy of people who carried things they had not yet decided to set down. What she noticed instead were the smaller things. The way he always made certain there was a chair near the counter before she arrived in the mornings. Not because he had said anything about it, but because he had observed, once, that she was on her feet for 8 hours straight and hadn't complained. The way he checked the back door lock every evening before she left, not because he had been asked to, but because the road behind the mercantile was poorly lit, and he had apparently decided, without discussion, that this was something he was responsible for. "You're very thorough," she said to him one afternoon, watching him go through the week's accounts for the second time. "Things have a way of falling apart when you're not," he said. He said it evenly, the way he said most things. But there was something underneath the words, a density to them that suggested they had not originated in a philosophy about bookkeeping. Clara filed that away and said nothing further. It was on a Friday evening in October, 6 weeks into her employment, that the first real crack appeared. She had stayed late to finish a shipment inventory that had arrived damaged and needed careful sorting. Reuben had stayed too, though she hadn't asked him to, working at the counter while she worked at the back table. The two of them quiet and comfortable in the particular way of people who have discovered they do not need to fill the silence between them. The door opened without a knock. The man who came in was perhaps 50, barrel-chested and trail-worn, with the look of someone who had ridden hard, and was not inclined to be diplomatic about why. He swept the room with his eyes until they landed on Reuben. Something hardened in his jaw. "Calloway," he said. Reuben set down his pen with the measured calm of a man who had been expecting this for some time and had long since made his peace with it. "Harlan," he said. Clara kept her hands on the inventory sheets in her lap and her eyes on the crates in front of her. "Your father's been asking," the man said. His voice had the carrying quality of someone used to speaking across open land. "The partners want to know if you intend to honor the agreement or if they should take it to a lawyer." "Tell them what I've always told them," Reuben said. "I'll honor my obligations. I won't honor the ones that were never mine to begin with." A silence followed that had the texture of something long unresolved. "That's not going to satisfy them," the man said. "I'm aware," Reuben said. "Tell them all right." The man looked at him for a long moment. His eyes moved briefly to Clara, then back. He put his hat on, nodded once in a way that was not a gesture of agreement but of acknowledgement, and left. The door closed. The store settled back into its ordinary evening quiet. Reuben picked up his pen. He did not look at her. Clara returned to the inventory. But the word agreement sat in the back of her mind for the rest of the evening. Compact and unexplained, the way an unfamiliar word in a known language sits on the tongue. She almost didn't say anything. She had told herself it wasn't her business, and she had meant it. But that night, walking home along the board sidewalk in the cold October air, she found herself thinking about her own 2 years of careful silence, about the things she had not asked and the assumptions she had made, and the morning she had opened a letter and found that the entire architecture of her expected future had been quietly dismantled without her knowledge. She had decided on the stage to Dry Creek that she was finished with silence as a survival strategy. The following morning, she arrived at the mercantile before Reuben did, which was itself unusual. She made coffee on the small stove in the back room and was pouring 2 cups when she heard the front door. He came in and stopped when he saw the cups. He looked at her. "I have a question," Clara said. She kept her voice even. "You don't have to answer it." He crossed the room and sat on the stool at the end of the counter. "All right," he said. "The man last night, and the men before him." She paused. "Is there something about this business or about you that I should know?" "In the course of my work, I mean." It was carefully phrased. She had thought about it on the walk in. Reuben looked at her for a long moment. Then he wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and looked at the window instead. Outside, Dry Creek was beginning its slow morning start. A wagon moving past, a dog barking twice and then going quiet. "My father," he said, "built a trading company. Not a mercantile, a company, significant contracts. Territorial, supply agreements." He paused. He built it with 2 partners who had different ideas about how those contracts should be honored. "When I was 25, I refused to sign a document that would have extended the company's reach into methods I could not agree to." Another pause. My father and I have not spoken since. Clara was quiet. This store, he said, is mine. I built it separately. My name, my accounts, my inventory. But my name is still on documents in my father's company because he put it there before the disagreement, and the partners believe that entitles them to certain things. Don's it? Clara asked. His jaw set in that particular way she had begun to recognize as Reuben Calloway sorting through something difficult. Legally, perhaps. Morally, no. Clara considered that. She turned her cup slowly in her hands. Why didn't you tell me when you hired me? He looked at her then, directly, the way he did when something mattered. Because I didn't want it to be the first thing you saw when you looked at this place, he said. Or at me. A pause. It usually is. The morning light came through the front window and lay in long, pale strips across the wooden floor between them. I'm not looking at it, Clara said. I'm looking at you. Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically. The way a room changes when a window is opened and the air that comes in is cleaner than expected. He nodded once. He didn't say anything further. Neither did she. But when she rose to turn the sign on the door from closed to open, he stood too, and for a moment they were side by side at the front of the store, looking out at the ordinary morning street of Dry Creek, and the distance between them was different than it had been the day before. Not smaller exactly, just more honestly measured. The letter came from his father in November. Reuben read it at the counter while Clara sorted the week's mail into the postbox slots along the back wall. She did not watch him read it, but she heard the quality of his silence change. When she turned, he was folding the letter with the careful, deliberate movements of a man deciding something. I need to go to Harlan, he said. 3 days, maybe 4. There's a man there who can settle the legal question once and for all if I'm willing to have the conversation. Are you willing? Clara asked. He was quiet for a moment. I think, he said slowly, I've been waiting for someone to ask me that. She looked at him. This steady, private, complicated man who had spent years making himself small inside a large and tangled history, who had built something honest in a quiet town and spent his days waiting for the past to find him, which it reliably did. Then go, she said simply, and come back. He looked at her with that careful, unhurried attention that she had come to understand was simply the way he received things that mattered to him. I'll come back, he said. And then, as though he understood that was an easy thing to say, I want to come back. Clara turned back to the mail slots, but her hands had gone still, and she stayed that way for a moment longer than the task required. He was gone for 5 days. On the 3rd day, a brief message arrived through the stage office, longer than expected, matter more complicated than anticipated. RC. Clara set it on the counter and went back to work. On the 5th evening, she heard boots on the front steps, and then the familiar weight of a hand on the door handle, a sound she had apparently learned to recognize without realizing she was learning it. He came in trail-worn and tired and carrying, visibly, the look of a man who had set something very heavy down after a very long time. How did it go? She asked. He sat in the chair beside the counter. The chair he had put there for her, months ago, before either of them understood what they were building. The legal question is settled, he said. My name comes off the company documents entirely. It cost me an agreement about the Harlan supply contracts, which were never profitable to begin with. And your father? His expression moved through something complicated. We talked, he said. First real conversation in 7 years. It was not easy. He looked at the floor briefly, but it was honest. That's more than we managed the last time. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, that took courage, or stubbornness, he said. The two looked similar at a distance. She almost smiled. I've noticed. He looked up at her then. The tiredness was still there, but beneath it something had eased that she hadn't realized she'd been watching for. There's something I should have told you earlier, he said. The company, Clara said. The size of it, he nodded. It isn't a small operation. My family's name is significant in this part of the territory. I've been deliberate about keeping that separate from this store, from how people see me here. I know, Clara said. He looked at her. You knew Harlan, she said simply, the man who came in October. The way he said your father's name. People don't ride 3 days to argue with a man who runs a small dry goods store. She paused. I just didn't think it was my place to ask. Something crossed his face that she had never quite seen there before. Not surprise exactly. The expression of a person who has been seen clearly by someone they had not expected to see them at all. Why didn't you say something? He asked. Because it didn't seem like the most important thing, Clara said. Not here. The evening had gone dark outside the windows. The stove in the back room ticked softly in the cooling air. It isn't. He said the most important thing. He said it quietly, the way he said the things he meant most. Not anymore. What followed did not arrive in a single moment. It came the way most true things came, gradually, then all at once, and recognizable afterward as the shape it had always been moving toward. He asked her to walk with him on a Sunday morning in late November. The sky was high and pale, the kind of cold that made sound carry further than usual, so that the creak of the boardwalk under their boots seemed to travel a long way before it faded. They walked without a particular destination. His hands were in his coat pockets. Hers were tucked into her sleeves. When the path narrowed at the edge of the churchyard, their arms brushed, and neither of them moved apart. I've been thinking about the store, he said after a long, comfortable quiet. About what it could be. With the right, he paused, choosing carefully, with the right partnership. Clara looked at him sideways. He was looking straight ahead, but there was that quality in his voice she had learned to recognize. Reuben Calloway working his way towards something important, by way of something practical. The back room needs expanding, he continued, and the accounts have grown past what one person can manage alone, and another pause. I can't quite picture what this place is supposed to become without picturing you in it. The bare cottonwood branches moved against the pale sky above them. That, Clara said, is either the most practical proposal I have ever heard or the most romantic one. Which would you prefer it to be? He asked. She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. She turned to face him, this careful and complicated and entirely honest man, and she felt something in her chest settle into a warmth that had no trace of doubt in it at all. Both, she said, at the same time. He reached out and took her hand from her sleeve, careful and deliberate, the way he did everything that mattered to him. She let him. Then both it is, he said. They were married on the 2nd of January, in the small church at the edge of Dry Creek, with the town's postmaster as witness and Mrs. Fenn in the front pew, wearing her good hat and looking quietly pleased in the way of someone who has observed a thing developing for some time and is glad to have been proven right. The following spring, Clara stood behind the newly expanded counter of Calloway Mercantile and looked out the front window at the main street of Dry Creek. The sign above the door had been repainted. It read in the same careful hand as the accounts ledger, Calloway Mercantile Est, 1871, R&C Calloway. Proprietors. She had a letter to write that afternoon. A proper address on the envelope. Sent to no one she was leaving behind, but towards something. A version of her life that had, through no plan of her own and by an entirely unlikely route, become more than she had thought to ask for. She usually found the words when she sat down. She did, if quiet stories like this one speak to you. Slow, honest, and unhurried in the places that matter, there are more waiting. Different lives, different towns. Different two people finding their way towards something real. If this one found you somewhere worth mentioning, tell me where. And tell me honestly, what did it do right? Your thoughts are how these stories grow.